In this video, we're going to show you how to install fuel injectors on your Nissan Versa, located on the top side of your engine. Let's start by using our 10mm wrench, and we're going to loosen the ground terminal on our battery. Go ahead and spin it off and just tuck that off to the side for now. We want to go ahead and access our fuse panel right here. And those little plastic tabs, you want to push these out and away. And it's going to lift up on the back side. You have two more of these tabs on the front side. And do the same over here. And once that's free, go ahead and lift up on this. And we want to go ahead and spin this up. We want to access the fuses on the bottom side here. Now on the bottom side here, we have a listing of what our fuses cover. We're going to look for the fuel pump system. And we can find our fuel pump right over here, and it is labeled as 45A. We're going to come over here, and our 45A is actually this 15 amp fuse, this blue one right here. We're going to use our pliers, gently grab that fuse, pull it out, set that aside. Now with that released, we're going to just set that down. We want to go ahead and get our ground terminal, and we're going to twist that on there. We don't have to tighten it down, we just want to make sure that it's making good contact. At this point, we want to hop into the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and start up the vehicle and drain that fuel system. And we're going to go ahead and start the vehicle, and we're going to let it run until that fuel is drained out of the fuel system, depressurizing our fuel lines. Let it run, and this should stall out in just a minute. There it is right there. We're going to try one more time. There it is. I'm going to turn our key back. And we're going to disconnect the ground terminal on our battery. And just spin that off. Using a 10mm socket and ratchet, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the two bolts on the top of our engine cover. Remove those bolts. And on the front side, we're going to lift up. And we're disconnecting the plastic posts. Disconnecting our plastic posts from the two rubber grommets on the front side. Right here, you have your vacuum hose right here, and there's a clamp. We're going to use our pliers. Pinch this and work that up. We want to go ahead and remove our intake tube area here. We're going to start by loosening the two 8mm hose clamps here. There's one here, and there's one on this side here. Let's go to the other end over here. I'll slide that up and off. And we're just going to gently work this off of the throttle body. Pop that off of the intake box and set that aside. Around our throttle body is going to be a series of hoses we want to go ahead and disconnect. There's one here, one on the bottom, one in the middle over here, and then we have our electrical connector on the back. We're going to start with our electrical connector, reach around, and there's a little tab on the back side. You're going to press that in, wiggle that connector, disconnect that. We're going to use our pliers to go ahead and disconnect these other hose clamps here. Work that off. Do the same for the bottom. Once you slide those back, I like to use our hose pliers here. Grab that, give it a couple twists, break that free, and start to work that off. Now we have our hose clamps removed off of these two lower ports here. You want to pay attention because these here have actual coolant in them to cool that throttle body. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jam some towels in there because we will have some coolant come out of this here. We just want something to catch that coolant, or as much of it as possible. I'm going to use a few of these towels, put them underneath. Now if you happen to have something like this here, these are hose clamps. You can actually put it on the line itself. And I'm just going to pinch that, lock that into place. And that should stop a majority of that fluid from coming out. There'll be just a little bit of residual fluid in that hose. Grab your hose pliers, slide this off. If you don't have these here, you can also use a pair of locking pliers here. And all you're going to do is gently pinch that hose, use your pliers, and slide off that other hose here on the base. There we go. On the side of the throttle body here, we want to go ahead and disconnect this electrical connector. It's going to pinch the tab, slide that off. You want to go ahead and locate this hose right here. It comes around to another hose clamp. Use your pliers, slide that back. You want to go ahead and pull that off. Disconnect it from the back retainers of the intake. On the front side, we have our air intake here. There should be normally two plastic retainer pins here. Ours is missing one, but you want to use your trim tool. Pop up the center. Remove that button there, or remove both of them if you have them. I want to work this up and out. And we can pull up our whole intake box here. Using your trim tool, there is a vent hose on the back side. It's just a little clip holding it. Just twist that. Pop this unit and remove that. On the lower portion of our intake, there's going to be 5 bolts. There's one here in the lower left, one up inside here. You come across, and this is the third one right in front of the oil dipstick tube. The fourth one is up underneath here, and then the fifth one is on the lower right down below here. Those are 10 millimeter. Let's go ahead, loosen and remove those. Now what I'm going to do is I want to loosen all of these first, and then I'll come on back and remove them. To access that middle bolt, just pull up on that dipstick. You can just bend it off to the side, and you can access that way there. Move on to the next one. All right, we have all 5 of them loose. Let's go ahead and remove those. On the back side of the intake, there is a 12 millimeter nut and bolt right here. I'm going to go ahead and spray that with a little bit of rust penetrant. Looks like there's some corrosion on here. I'm going to let that set in for a couple minutes. Remove the nut, and then pull the bolt out through the back side. Remove the throttle body. There are 4 8 millimeter bolts, 2 on the top here, 2 on the bottom. Now there's probably going to be some residual coolant in that throttle body, so when you remove it, just be careful. Go ahead and pull that up and out. Use a 10 millimeter socket to loosen and remove this lower bolt here on the bottom side of that intake. Right down here we have our harness that's held onto the intake with a little plastic retainer. We're going to use our needle nose pliers. Just squeeze it on those little retainer tabs. Separate that from the intake. And grab that intake, and we're going to gently rock it back and forth until that comes free. And lift up on the back side of the intake. And then work that forward. Right here we can go ahead and separate this hose. We're going to use our pliers on that. I'm going to try and just break that free and then twist that off. At this point, we want to go ahead and block off our intake ports here. We're going to use some clean towels and just tuck those in. We want to keep any debris from falling down inside of the intake. And we have our 4 fuel injectors running across here. We have our fuel rail right on top. We're going to go ahead and use our pliers. And these here have little plastic tabs on the bottom to push in, and then you want to pull that harness off. Sometimes they can be buggers, so I like to use some needle nose pliers. Gently pinch and pull. Give that a little wiggle. Do this to all 4. On this wire harness right here, there's a little retainer strap. Use your needle nose pliers, and you're going to pinch the little tabs on the back side. We should be able to pull that out. Push it up out of the way. And we want to go ahead and disconnect our fuel rail. Now, we did drain out as much fuel as possible when we start up the vehicle at the beginning. There still may be some residual fuel in here, but probably not under pressure. What I like to do is use some drop cloths or towels. I'm going to put those down underneath like so. All these are here to do is catch any residual gas that might just kind of come out of those injectors or that fuel rail. Now on the bottom there are 2 10mm bolts. There's one over here on the left, one on the right hand side. Let's go ahead and loosen those. Pull both of those bolts out and set those aside. Now with those bolts removed, we should be able to go ahead and wiggle this fuel rail and the injectors out. It's always good to be wearing safety glasses when performing a job like this here in case there is a little bit of pressure left in there. The injectors are held into the engine with O-ring seals, creating a good tight seal. So you want to apply some pressure on these here to pull them out. So now that we have the fuel rail loose, we can go ahead and pull out our injectors. On the top side right here, we have a little retainer clip for that fuel line. So now we can go ahead and lift this up and access the clips on our injectors. And take your fuel rail with the injectors. We're going to just flip this over. Now there are retaining clips on the back side here. Just kind of work the front side. You're going to just push with your fingers, undo that retaining clip. Now if that gives you a little bit of a hard time, just to finish getting it off, just kind of use your flathead and just gently work that back and forth. It doesn't take much. Go ahead and disconnect that. Now these are the retainers that secure the injector to the fuel rail. Now at this point, you can go ahead and grab that injector and wiggle that free. There's a rubber O-ring in there securing this in place. Just going to firmly grab that and wiggle that out. Sometimes these can be buggers, so just want to work that out. Once you get it past that O-ring, it should just pop right out for you. Now that we have that out, we have our towel down below. Go ahead and set that aside. Now, as you can see, when we popped that out, it did have a little bit of fuel inside the rail and it sprayed out. Safety glasses, as I had mentioned earlier, very, very important when doing this job. Now we have our new injector here, has the O-ring along the top. You need to press that in there. I'm going to go ahead and use some solvent here, spray that in, and press that into place. Now that you have the injector in place here, I'm going to spin that around. You want that to be in the same position with the electrical connector facing the front. Take your retaining lock right here, line that up, and press it down into place. You want to make sure that this lock or retainer is correctly installed, otherwise you will end up with a fuel leak. And if you look at the other injectors, you can see that there's a little tab right here that fits into this notch. So we're going to make sure that our new injector is positioned properly. And that this snaps into place. We also have these little notches on the side right here. And those line up with the metal ring. So make sure that the lock collar is on there. It's on this side here as well. Give that injector a wiggle and it's secured. Now I'm going to repeat this process for the other three. Now when we removed our initial fuel rail and injectors, the O-rings that go into the cylinder head were actually stuck in here. So we're just going to use a small pick here to go ahead and grab these O-rings. Go ahead and pull these out. There's one of the O-rings there. You want to repeat this process for any of the other O-rings that are stuck in the cylinder head. In our case here, it was all of them. Now we went ahead and we used some solvent and we sprayed around the injector areas here to make sure that the base or the seat inside the cylinder head is clean of any debris. We're now going to go ahead and bring our injectors over and we're going to spray the O-rings with solvent. Line this up. Get the injectors lined up in here and push that fuel rail in. Go ahead and wiggle this. You know, that solvent on those O-rings is going to help those slide into place. You don't want to use oils or anything like that. That solvent is just a little trick to get that to slide into place. You can look underneath here and see that the holes for the fuel rails, the bolt holes are lined up perfect. So let's go ahead and get those two bolts installed there. Once you get those started, let's go ahead and snug those down. Fuel rail should be nice and tight. We can now go ahead and reconnect our injectors here. We're going to push on that harness. And you press those on. You can feel them and hear them snap into place. And go ahead and remove our towel. Now we have our intake here, and around each one of these ports is a rubber seal. Now normally what you want to do is go ahead and replace those seals. In our particular case here, we're just going to take some solvent. I'm going to go ahead and clean this. Most of the time these gaskets are reusable. You can run your finger on the edge here, see if that gasket is still protruding out further than the plastic. And if it is, you could go ahead and give those a shot. I want to make sure that our surface here is clean of any debris. Making sure that these ports seal up nice. Okay, our intake looks like it's ready to go. I'm going to bring this over. We line this up with our metal line in the back. This was the last piece that we had popped off on the intake. So I'm going to work that on. Push that into place. We're going to use our pliers. Go ahead and bring that clamp up into place. Now in doing so, you want to be careful. Make sure that your gaskets that you had installed or the original gaskets don't fall out while doing this. You just kind of have to manipulate this back into position. Now installing your intake, you want to make sure that the intake goes behind this metal bracket here. You can go ahead and look down and make sure that your intake is sitting flush on the head. You want to go ahead and install the 5 front lower intake bolts on. I'm just going to start these by hand. Once we get them all started, we can come back and snug those down. Now we have all 5 of our bolts in. We're just going to pop the dipstick back into place. Before we tighten those, we want to go to the back of the intake. We want to install the bolt on the back side here. That is the nut and bolt application for this. The bolt goes in from the back side. Good, and move the intake around a little bit. That's why you don't want to tighten the front yet. That way you can adjust the back, get that bolt in. Before we tighten any of these down, let's go ahead and install the bolt underneath where the throttle body would go. Install that lower bolt back here. I like to thread that in as far as I can by hand. Now let's go ahead and just snug these down gently, and then we'll torque them down. There is this particular sequence that we need to tighten these down in, as well as torquing. We don't want to crack the plastic intake. That'll just open up a can of worms, drivability problems, all kinds of stuff like that. This bolt right here should be torqued down to 8 inch-pounds. In our case here, it is pretty much just gently snug. We're going to do the same for the bolt underneath where the throttle body goes. Once that bolt is bottomed out, just give it a hair bit more. You don't want to over tighten that because that is plastic, so if you torque wrench to do that, it is 8 inch-pounds. Now our 5 bolts for the intake have to be torqued in a particular sequence, and these get tightened down to 20 inch-pounds. Very, very specific. I'm going to start with the center bolt, and I'm going to mark this right on the intake. It's going to be number 1 right in the middle, number 2, number 3, 4, and 5. That is a torque sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tighten these down to 20 inch-pounds. So you want to go ahead and torque down this lower bolt here to 8 inch-pounds if you have the ability to do so. If not, it's basically just snug. Using a rag with some solvent on it, you want to go ahead and clean the surface here. Now there is also an O-ring here where the throttle body would seal to. I'm going to wipe out the inside of the port here for the intake. There is an O-ring here. You do want to do a careful inspection on this here, see if there's any tears, damage, or anything like that. If there is, you need to replace it. I run my finger on the outside here. You can feel if that gasket is protruding out further than the plastic intake. If it is, go ahead and reuse it. If not, you want to go ahead and replace it. Take your throttle body, spin it over. I want to make sure that the surface here is clean. I'm going to set that down. Find a clean spot on our towel, use some solvent, spray it on a rag. Do not spray the throttle body. Go ahead and clean that mating surface. Once it's confirmed that it's clean, we can go ahead and install it. You're going to line this up and install the 4 bolts that secure it in place. Once you have all 4 of those started, we can go ahead and gently snug those down. Do not over tighten. Once that bottoms out, go to the next one. I like to do a crisscross pattern. Torque down the throttle body bolts to 89 inch-pounds. I'm going to do this in a crisscross pattern. Install your lower coolant hoses. Make sure that you move your clamps back into place. Install a vacuum port. Be careful with this here. This is plastic. You don't want to snap that off. So line it up. We're going to pinch this open and slide that right up and into place. Reconnect the electrical connector right here. Line that up. Push it up and on. You can hear and feel it snap on. Our electrical connector on the back side of the throttle body. Grab that connector, line that up, push it on. You can hear it and feel it snap in. We're going to disconnect our clamp here. Now we have our fuel line and we need to pop into this clip here. And when we installed it, this line should have been on the other side here because this is not flexible. This is a hard line here. Super simple. You're just going to put your fingers underneath on each side, push in and push up. This little black plastic clamp will pop right up and out. Push that line over, snap back in, and push that hose in. That simple. I'm going to go ahead and pop our hose into place here. Pop that into place, run the hose around, and put this into your intake. Use your pliers, move that hose clamp down into position. I'm going to go ahead and install our air intake unit here. On the bottom right here, we have this pin that's going to insert into a rubber grommet down below. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up. Lower our intake port down and in. Line this up. Now there's a plastic pin right here as well. It's going to go in. You want to push this down and get this into our air box. This will fit into the filter box here. Push that in. Push this down and into place. On the front side, we can go ahead and install our plastic push pin here. Go ahead and install your pin. If you have the other one, go ahead and install that now. Install our vent tube right here. Little plastic pin that pops in. Snap that into place. Going to install our intake tube here. Going to feed this in, push that in, and work that back into place for your throttle body. Now you want to make sure that these are fully seated. Once it's in place, go ahead and push that vacuum hose down on the top. Let's go ahead and move that clamp down into position. Make sure that locks on. Use your pliers, pinch and relocate down. Now our band is just a little bit crooked here. We're going to loosen this. It's going to allow that to line back up and then snug it down. We have our back clamp here on our air filter box. Let's do the same here. Now both of these are snug. We're all reattached. I want to go ahead and install our upper engine cover. We have these two plastic studs right here that fit into the rubber grommet on the intake. Pop those in, install your upper bolts here. And let's go ahead and snug those down. And once those bolts bottom out, you just want to give it a little bit more just to snug them into place. Over here, back to our fuse box. Take that 15 amp fuse. Insert that into its proper location. Push it in, make sure it's in all the way. Now I want to drop this down in a position. Now this does go in a particular way. There's a corner that's notched off here that needs to go down by the fender. Good, line that up. Push that down and in. These 4 tabs will secure that. Now let's go ahead and install our battery terminal and snug this down. With it all assembled, what you want to do is hop into the vehicle. I'm going to turn the key to the on position. I'm not going to start it. And what's happening here is we're priming the fuel system. We're going to turn the key off again. turn it back on. This should be priming the fuel system, getting fuel all the way up to those injectors. Now I can go ahead and start the vehicle. I'm going to check for any leaks. At this point here, there's no fuel leaking down underneath. There's no smell of fuel, and this engine is purring like a kitten. We can now go ahead and take the vehicle for a test drive. And at this point, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.